Timothy Snyder, Bloodlands, Europe between Hitler and Stalin. Embark on an insightful exploration of the harrowing journey of Eastern Europeans during 1933 to 1947, caught between two ruthless regimes in The Bloodlands, Europe between Hitler and Stalin, by Timothy Snyder. This summary illustrates their struggles under the ruthless Soviet regime led by Joseph Stalin, and the merciless Nazi Germans under Adolf Hitler. It highlights key events such as the disastrous famine caused by the Soviet Union's collectivization policy, the execution and displacement of ethnic minorities, the invasion of Poland, and the mass extermination of Jews. Get ready to witness the painful and tragic stories of Eastern Europeans, who lived trapped between these two merciless forces during a period of widespread death and suffering.
Stalin's deadly collectivization. In 1933, during the height of the Great Depression, the Western world struggled with poverty and unemployment. Meanwhile, Eastern Europe faced one of the deadliest famines in history, all due to Joseph Stalin's ill-conceived collectivization policy. This policy, aimed at increasing agricultural efficiency, forced farmers to join large collective farms, granting them legal advantages over small private farms. However, poor equipment and rough weather conditions led to food shortages, and Stalin's inflexible demands for meeting quotas resulted in the seizure of farmers' grain, pushing the situation into a catastrophic crisis. By year's end, the famine had claimed an estimated 5.5 million lives across the Soviet Union, with 3.3 million deaths in Ukraine alone. Stalin's iron fist rule. Stalin's collectivization and economic policies led to rapid growth in the Soviet Union but inflicted immense suffering on the population. Fearful of losing power, he targeted affluent farmers, or kulaks, during the dekulakization wave from 1929 to 1932. The term kulak became a weapon against perceived enemies, resulting in around 380,000 deaths. Stalin also targeted ethnic minorities, particularly Poles, fearing their potential alliance with foreign enemies. From 1937 to 1938, 85,000 Poles were executed in Soviet Russia. The government further persecuted Latvians, Estonians, and Lithuanians, branding them as spies, causing an additional 274,000 deaths during the national cleansing in the early 1930s. Life in the Soviet Union was brutal before World War II, yet, even darker days lay ahead for its people. Invasion of betrayed Poland. Stalin's Soviet government was initially the primary threat to Poland, but that changed in 1939 when Hitler made an unexpected pact with Stalin, his ideological opponent. Both powers agreed to invade Poland, Germany from the west and Russia from the east, shocking the world. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany attacked Poland without warning, and Poland's allies did nothing to help. German soldiers dehumanized Poles and engaged in heinous acts such as using prisoners of war as human shields. Many fleeing from Germany's invasion went east, only to be trapped when Soviet forces invaded from the other direction on September 17. Ironically, hundreds of thousands of Soviets hoped to fight Nazi Germany despite Stalin's deal with Hitler. However, both Nazi and Soviet forces ended up committing atrocities against innocent Polish civilians, leaving the nation to suffer interminably. Crushing Polish resistance. As Stalin's Red Army invaded Poland, so did the NKVD, the Soviet Union's secret service, with the purpose of incorporating Eastern Poland into the Soviet Union efficiently. The NKVD was tasked to eliminate any potential opposition, targeting specific professions deemed dangerous, such as military veterans, civil servants, and policemen. In doing so, thousands of Polish citizens would be deported, with around 50,000 deaths resulting from the travel-related stresses. The educated class of Poland was also seen as a threat, as their absence would lead to the disintegration of the country's political and social foundation. Around 25,000 Poles participated in resistance, but the NKVD managed to infiltrate these organizations, using their existence as a reason to intensify their pursuit of Polish intellectuals. Approximately 97% of prisoners in Soviet labor camps were educated Poles, where conditions were brutal and many laborers died. Through extensive surveillance, Stalin successfully crushed the Polish intellectual class and other groups he viewed as dangerous, yet Nazi Germany's suppression system was no less cruel. Inside Nazi-occupied territories. Through Hitler's occupation of Poland, 20 million Poles, 6 million Czechs, and 2 million Jews were subjugated under the Nazi regime, making Germany Europe's second-largest multinational state. Lacking facilities to deport these people to remote labor camps, Hitler devised various methods to suppress them. In 1940, the Nazis created ghettos in occupied Poland, forcing Jews to live in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. The imposition of yellow stars as identification added to the humiliation. Some 60,000 Jews perished in the Warsaw Ghetto alone between 1940 and 1941. As part of the Nazis' agenda, Poles identified as educated, politically active, or part of the clergy were publicly executed, totaling 3,000 by the end of 1940. While the Polish Jewish elite was temporarily exempted and tasked with enforcing ghetto policies, the non-Jewish Polish elite was viewed as a prominent threat. Unlike the Soviets, who practiced secrecy in their executions, the Nazis unapologetically carried out killings in full public view. Nazi invasion's ruthless agony. Life for ethnic minorities in Stalin's Soviet Union was challenging, however, the Nazi invasion further exacerbated their suffering. The invasion's objective was to expand German Lebensraum, with no regard for the existing Eastern population. Hitler aimed to expel or exterminate them, replacing them with Germans. The invasion, which started on June 22, 1941, targeted areas of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, eastern Poland, Belarus, and parts of Ukraine. Civilians faced starvation as the army confiscated food supplies, while prisoners of war were hardly fed and deprived of clothing. Forced starvation policies led to millions of casualties. Once Germany arrived at Leningrad, the city's population of 3.5 million faced a death rate of roughly 57.5%. Ultimately, 3.1 million Soviet prisoners of war were killed during the invasion. Hitler's tactic shift in 1941. Nazi Germany's initial advancements into the Soviet Union were not as fruitful as hoped. Despite pushing their forces back, the Soviets did not crumble as anticipated. Instead, new challenges emerged, forcing Hitler to change his strategy by the fall of 1941. The conquest did not solve Germany's economic issues, it only created fresh obstacles. The once underestimated Red Army displayed remarkable resilience and sheer size, stretching German forces thin. Realizing the urgency, Hitler began recruiting from occupied territories and POW camps, garnering about 1 million recruits to support their cause. These conscripted soldiers performed a variety of roles, from digging trenches that would serve as mass graves for Jews to guarding concentration camps. In desperation, Hitler's Germany spared certain individuals from the Bloodlands, but the Jewish people found no such reprieve. Evolving Nazi plans for Jews. Initially, Nazi Germany aimed to deport all Jews from the newly expanded German Reich, considering various plans such as mass relocation to ghettos in Lublin, Poland, or deportation to Madagascar and the Soviet Union. However, circumstances like proximity to ethnic Germans, British naval control, and Stalin's refusal forced Germany to pivot towards the horrific strategy of mass extermination. Eventually, as the war extended, occupied territories witnessed the construction of ghettos, concentration, and extermination camps, which ultimately resulted in the Holocaust, claiming 6 million Jewish lives. As the tide of events changed for Nazi Germany throughout World War II, so did their approach to the populations of Jewish people living within their occupied zones. Initially, the intent was to forcibly remove Jews from these regions by deportation. However, due to logistical and political constraints, the Nazis abandoned these plans in favor of a more sinister solution, mass extermination. In search of a viable deportation strategy, a large-scale ghetto in Lublin's Polish district was proposed but dismissed due to its proximity to ethnic German communities. Adolf Hitler then approached Joseph Stalin with the proposition of relocating Jews to the Soviet Union. Stalin firmly declined this proposal. Another plan, involving Jewish deportation to Madagascar, proved to be impossible as the British Navy controlled the necessary sea routes. With approximately 5 million Jews living under German occupation, Hitler altered his methodology drastically in 1942. Jews within the western regions of the German Reich were forcibly gathered into ghettos while special forces pursued and rounded up Jews in freshly conquered territories. Concentration camps were built in the western sectors, where many were imprisoned and subjected to forced labor until death. The Nazi regime demonstrated even greater brutality in occupied Poland, constructing massive extermination camps focused on systematically killing Jewish people. The Holocaust, a devastating chapter in human history, resulted in the murder of 6 million Jews, including 1 million who perished at the Treblinka death camp alone. The struggle for resistance. As German tyranny swept across the lands, insurmountable challenges threatened the existence of resistance groups. With residents facing a seemingly lose-lose situation, choosing sides became a matter of life, death, and caution. The Poles and Baltic communities, crushed between the impervious German and Soviet forces, had little choice but to endure the unrelenting war. Efforts by Jewish individuals in ghettos to rise against their oppressors often ended in tragedy, as observant Nazis quickly and ruthlessly snuffed out any resistance. The 1943 Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, for instance, concluded with Heinrich Himmler's ruthless extermination of 13,000 Jews, while the remaining survivors faced indefinite despair in death camps. Despite their courage, these resilient groups faced harrowing realities, ultimately overwhelming any real chance of successful, widespread resistance. Uncertain allies, partisans and Soviets. As the Red Army advanced against German forces, some partisans sought collaboration with the Soviets in hopes of ousting the Nazis from their lands. However, the Soviets and Stalin had their own agenda, seeking to annex these territories into the Soviet Union. Despite partisans secretly sharing German positions, the Soviets offered minimal support in return, considering them potential threats. This suspicion was evident in the Red Army's non-intervention during the Polish Home Army's 1944 attack on German troops. With their superior numbers and firepower, the Germans inflicted 500,000 casualties on the Poles. Once the Red Army entered the battlefield, they disarmed and arrested resistance survivors. Stalin's policies led to the persecution of anyone considered undesirable, since partisans and non-partisans alike posed potential threats to Soviet power. This persecution extended to any collaborators and continued a pre-war standard of targeting anyone deemed an enemy of the state. Retribution's horrors in 1945. As the war neared its end in February 1945, Germany faced imminent defeat. The Allies already planned on restricting post-war Germany to a confined region in Europe, with relocated Germans inhabiting the area. To actualize this, they first had to conquer Germany, prompting the Red Army to invade German territories from the east. The Soviets, comprising freed prisoners turned soldiers, sought revenge on the Germans and committed dreadful crimes, with rape and forced labor being rampant during their vengeful march. German civilians in the territories abandoned by the Reich had to endure a mass deportation, with around 3.8 million people forced to leave their homes. The traumatic journey claimed the lives of an estimated 400,000 Germans due to hunger and illness, underscoring the merciless consequences of war. Post-war suffering continues. As World War II came to a close on May 8, 1945, the hardships faced by those living in the Bloodlands did not cease. Stalin sought to expand Soviet territory, leading to the annexation of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and the eastern half of Poland. At the Potsdam Conference in the summer of 1945, the Allied powers agreed to leave the Baltic states under Soviet control and move Poland's borders westward. Stalin persisted with his deportations in the newly acquired territories to create a homogeneous society and suppress dissent. Consequently, this led to the loss of lives of about 700,000 Germans, 150,000 Poles, 250,000 Ukrainians, and 300,000 Soviet citizens between 1943 and 1947.
By the end of their terrifying journey through the book summary of Bloodlands, Europe between Hitler and Stalin, readers gain a profound understanding of the harrowing experiences faced by the Eastern Europeans who endured terrible suffering from both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The key takeaways of this book include the disastrous results of Stalin's collectivization policies, forced deportations and persecution of ethnic minorities, the horrific conditions in concentration camps and ghettos, and the sheer destruction and death caused by the occupation of Poland. The overarching message is a clear display of the horrendous consequences of oppressive and inhumane regimes, and a tribute to the resilience and fortitude of those who fought to survive the darkest chapters of European history.